After my father died, my mother kicked me out of the house because she found a new man, but she didn't know he was a fraudster. After my father died, my mother kicked me out of the house because she found a new man, but she didn't know he was a fraudster. I never thought betrayal would come from my own mother. I had always believed that no matter what happened in life, no matter how hard things got, she would always be on my side. But when my father died, it was like something inside her died, too, something that had once connected us. At first, it was little things. She stopped calling me by the pet name she had used since I was a kid. She stopped asking if I had eaten when I came home late. Her eyes, once filled with warmth, now held something else entirely, something distant, something cold. And then he arrived. Victor. The man who walked into our home like he had always belonged there. The man who smiled at me like he had already won. I should have seen it coming. I should have noticed the way my mother softened whenever he spoke, the way she laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. The way she started to act like she owed him something. But I was grieving. My father had barely been gone for a year, and I was too busy keeping myself together to notice that my mother was slipping away from me. It wasn't long before Victor started making decisions that should have never been his to make. One evening, I came home from work to find my room completely different. The posters, the books, the little things that made it mine, gone. The bed had been replaced with a smaller one. My desk was missing. The walls were repainted a color I hated. I stormed into the living room, where my mother and Victor were sitting, drinking wine like nothing had happened. "What the hell is this?" I demanded. Victor barely glanced up. "Relax, kid. We're just making better use of the space." My mother, my own mother, didn't even look at me. "You don't need all that clutter," she said dismissively. "You should be focusing on your future instead of wasting time on childish things." I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "This is my room, Mom. My things." She finally looked at me then, but there was no warmth in her gaze. Just tired indifference. "This is my house, Adam," she said. "And you're not a child anymore." I didn't argue. There was no point. That night, I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Victor's voice carrying through the halls. He spoke as if he owned everything. As if my father had never existed. The worst part? My mother let him. Things only got worse from there. Victor started making rules. No coming home after 10. No locking doors in the house. If you're going to eat, you should contribute to groceries. And my mother just agreed. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that it would pass, that she would come to her senses. But deep down, I knew. She wasn't the same woman who had raised me. Then, the final blow came. One evening, I came home to find my things packed in garbage bags by the door. My mother stood beside them, her arms crossed, while Victor leaned lazily against the wall, a smug smile on his face. "You need to leave," she said, her voice steady. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. "What?" Victor sighed dramatically. "Look, kid. You're 18 now. It's time for you to start taking care of yourself. Your mother and I need space. It's best for everyone." I looked at my mother, waiting for her to take it back. To say that she didn't mean it. That she would never throw me out like this. She said nothing. The silence was louder than any argument. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. "Where am I supposed to go?" Victor shrugged. "That's not our problem." I turned back to my mother one last time. "Mom." Still, she said nothing. That was when I knew, I was no longer her son. I didn't say another word. I grabbed the garbage bags and stepped outside. The door slammed behind me, the finality of it ringing in my ears. It was raining. I walked through the streets, soaked and shivering, but I didn't stop. I had no plan. No home. No family. But I had something better. A reason to come back. A reason to make them pay. The night I was kicked out, I walked for hours. The rain soaked through my clothes, my fingers were numb, and my stomach ached from hunger. I had nowhere to go, no backup plan, no safety net. But I had my anger. And sometimes, anger is enough. I crashed at a friend's place for a while, sleeping on his couch while I figured things out. His parents didn't ask too many questions, but I could tell they weren't comfortable with me staying forever. I understood. I needed to make a move. I took whatever job I could get, washing dishes, cleaning floors, hauling furniture for a moving company. It wasn't enough to afford a place of my own, but it was something. And for the first time in months, I had control over my own life. Every night, as I lay on that couch, staring at the ceiling, one thought circled in my mind: Victor took everything from me. And I was going to take it back. I knew I needed a long-term plan. Revenge wasn't something you rushed, it had to be carefully built, brick by brick, like a house. I found a construction job. It was brutal, long hours, heavy lifting, working under the sun until my skin burned. But I didn't care. It paid better than the other jobs, and more importantly, it taught me things. I learned how houses were built. How foundations were laid. How to read blueprints, fix electrical wiring, install plumbing. And while I worked, I listened. I overheard the older guys talking about real estate, about how money moved, how properties were bought and sold, how people got rich by understanding the system. And then one day, I heard something that changed everything. One of the guys, an older man named Ray, was talking about foreclosures. People think a house is forever, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. But if you don't handle your money right, if you take out loans you can't pay back, that house ain't yours. The bank will come knocking. The bank. That was when it hit me. I had been so focused on getting revenge on Victor that I had overlooked something bigger. What if I could take the entire house back? I didn't know if it was possible, but I was going to find out. That night, I stayed up researching. I went to the library and used their computers, reading everything I could about foreclosure laws, property transfers, and estate fraud. And what I found made my blood boil. The house was supposed to be mine. My father's will had stated that when I turned 21, ownership of the house would transfer to me. But somehow, Victor had convinced my mother to change everything, probably by feeding her lies, manipulating her into putting the deed in his name. But there was a problem. Victor wasn't rich. In fact, he was drowning in debt. I kept digging and found records of loans, unpaid bills, and gambling losses. He had been using my mother's money, my father's money, to keep himself afloat. But it wasn't enough. He was running out of cash. And when men like Victor run out of money, they make desperate mistakes. I smiled to myself. His time was running out. I spent the next year working, saving, planning. I stopped sleeping on couches and got a cheap room to rent. It was barely big enough for a mattress and a lamp, but I didn't care. Every cent I made went toward my goal. And then, when I was ready, I made my move. I started leaking Victor's debts to the people he owed money to. I made sure his creditors knew exactly where to find him. I contacted a lawyer, pretending to be a concerned third party, and asked about property fraud. If Victor had forged any documents to steal the house, it wouldn't hold up legally. I even tipped off the IRS about some suspicious tax filings. Slowly, the walls began closing in around him. Then came the final step. I left an envelope on my mother's doorstep. Inside were copies of every financial document, every forged signature, every hidden debt. And on top of the pile was a single note. "This is the man you chose over me." I didn't expect her to respond. I didn't expect anything at all. But a week later, the house was put up for sale. Victor was desperate for money. He was selling the house before the bank could take it from him. It was exactly what I had been waiting for. And now, it was time for the final blow. Victor had no idea how close he was to losing everything. He thought selling the house would save him. That if he could offload it quickly, he could pocket some cash, settle a few debts, and disappear before things caught up to him. He had no idea that I was waiting. The moment the house was listed, I made my move. I contacted a real estate agent, not in my name, of course. I had a friend pretend to be an interested buyer, someone eager to purchase quickly without asking too many questions. Victor, desperate for money, jumped at the chance. The deal moved fast. Too fast. Victor thought he was outsmarting the system, getting rid of the house before the banks could seize it. But he didn't realize that while he was selling off his last lifeline, I had already pulled the rug out from under him. The first blow came from the creditors. All those debts he had been running from. They came knocking. I had made sure that every loan shark, every business partner he had screwed over, knew exactly where to find him. And without the house as collateral, they wanted their money now. The second blow came from the IRS. That little tip I sent them about Victor's creative tax filings? It worked. They were already investigating him, but now that he was selling a property, they took notice. And then, the final blow. The house sale went through. Victor got his money. But the moment he tried to access it, his accounts were frozen. Fraud investigations. Tax evasion. Debt collection. Every single one of them hit him at once. And suddenly, Victor wasn't the one in control anymore. I didn't see him the day the police came. But I heard about it. How he had been sitting in a cheap motel, thinking he had escaped, only for the authorities to storm in and take him away in cuffs. My mother? She tried to stop it. She pleaded, swore there was a mistake. But it was too late. She had chosen him. And now, she would fall with him. A month later, I stood outside the house. My house. It was empty now. Just a hollow building, stripped of the life it once held. I had bought it back, not in my name, but through a proxy, just to make sure Victor never saw it coming. And now, I was here. The front door creaked as I stepped inside. The walls still smelled the same, faint traces of my childhood lingering in the air. But it wasn't home anymore. Not really. I walked through the halls, past the memories, past the ghosts of what had been. And then I stopped at the doorway of my old room. It was empty now, but I could still see it the way it was before. Before Victor. Before everything fell apart. I took a deep breath, then stepped back outside. Behind me, the house stood silent, waiting. I pulled out my lighter, flicking the flame to life. Then, without hesitation, I dropped it into the doorway. The fire caught instantly. I watched as the flames licked up the walls, swallowing everything whole. By the time I walked away, the house was ablaze, turning to ash behind me. Some people might have thought it was madness. A waste. But to me, it was freedom. Victor had taken everything from me. And now, I had taken everything from him. The past was gone. And I was finally free. The house always wins. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.